darling, I am growing older. Silver threads.
Thank you for agreeing to see me this afternoon, Mr and Mrs Mellows. I've come to see you at the doctor's suggestion to see what sort of help you might need now that Mr Mellows hasn't been so well. I have some questions I'd like to ask, and then I'll read them back to you and make sure I've understood what you've said, and then we'll perhaps make a support plan for the help that could be there for you both.
What was she saying?
She wants to know if we need any help. Tell her we can manage. We don't want no help from strangers.
I'm very sorry, Mr Mellows, you couldn't hear me. Shall I move a bit closer? There, how's that? Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, that is. You're a pretty young thing, aren't you?
Henry!
Well, she is. She does remind me of you in your younger days. My Sarah was a proper looker, she was.
Oh, you silly old goat. Stop it. Now, let's get on with it. We don't want to waste this lady's time.
All right, but can't we have a cup of tea? Well, I'll go and get it.
It's okay, Mr Mellows. Look, the tea tray's here. It's here.
Yeah, so it is.
All right. That's it. Do I call you Mr Mellows, or do you prefer to be called by your first name?
Well, it's best if he calls me Henry, because Mr Mellows was my father, you know. He properly Farmer Mellows. He was real strict, he was. But now you calls out Mellows, and I might not answer.
What about you, Mrs Mellows?
Oh, I'm Mrs Mellows, thank you.
Okay.
Shall I pour this tea before it gets cold?
That would be good, please.
I don't like Henry doing it now, not since he's had his stroke. Oh, this is a terrible teapot. It's going all over the place. Here, you do it.
Okay. Do you have milk and sugar, Mrs Mellows?
Just milk, please.
And what about you, Henry?
What about me what?
Do you have milk and sugar?
He just has milk. Just give him milk. Too much sugar's no good for him.
Okay. Here we go. Nearly there. I won't have one, so you had one just earlier. Right, I'll go back to my questions if that's all right. There's your tea, Henry. Do you follow a diet, Henry?
Oh, the doctor says I've got to watch what I eat because me blood pressure, you know, and that thing about sugar in you. What's that called, Sarah?
It's diabetes, Henry. The doctor says you mustn't let your blood sugars go up. Otherwise you'll have to take tablets. You've got to be careful about your diet. It's difficult, you see, because he's got a sweet tooth. It's because of the war and the rationing. We lived and worked on a farm, you see, and we had plenty of cream and ice cream.
Henry, would you give me permission to talk to your doctor?
I thought the doctor had sent you.
That's the hospital doctor. It would be helpful if I had Henry's permission to talk to his GP. I can't talk to anybody about you without your consent. I have a form that we can fill in, and that will let me talk to people like the pension people or to your family, but I can't talk to anybody about you without your permission. Does that sound all right to you, Henry?
Well, it sounds all right to me. It looks as though you've got an honest face. Anyway, if not, I'll get my Sarah onto it, because she does all the forms and things. She used to keep the books down at the farm, didn't you, my dear? Yeah.
What sort of help?
That will depend on our conversation and what support Mr Mellows might need. And you as well, Mrs Mellows, as his carer.
I'm not his carer, I'm his wife.
And as such, you will know him best. My job is to try and help you to be as independent and as safe as possible. We write a support plan. There might be all sorts of help and things that Henry can do for himself. You know, simple things. And there might be bits of equipment as well. Maybe a Zimmer frame, or possibly more complicated bits of equipment.
Well, I mean, sticks is fine. Mind you, I have been telling her I wouldn't mind one of the buggy things, you know. I'll go down to the village and the shop there and pick up the paper, you know, and the messages and that. I mean, it would save you a job, wouldn't it? She does too much, you know. Yeah.
What do you think of that, Mrs Mellows?
Well, it would give me a bit of peace, but I'd worry, you see. What if he fell out of the thing or it broke down?
Well, we'd need to think about the practicalities, wouldn't we? Is there anybody in the village that would help?
Well, there's Nora in the shop. She's a good sort. And then there's a couple of WI ladies who live down the road. I could have a word with them.
You're not more interfering women, surely.
Take no notice. You love it.
What else do you think might help?
Well, it is a bit private, like. I does have trouble at night time with the old waterworks.
Henry!
Well,
No, so it's all right, Mrs Mellows. Have you told anybody else about this?
no, I don't. Like I say, it's a bit private, isn't it?
Well, I think it'd be best to get it checked out. There are all sorts of reasons that might be causing it, some medical ones, so we'll ask the doctors, I think, to have a look. And then if they can't come up with anything, there are practical things we could do, you know, things like a commode. And I know it's not very nice, so we wouldn't want to do that first off. Let's get it checked out first, before we make any changes.
I'll get on to the surgery in the morning.
How do you manage with things like the shopping and cooking, Mrs Mellows?
Well, I don't like Henry driving anymore, not since his stroke, and I don't want to drive down to town unless I'm forced. I mean, we manage with the village shop and the vegetable garden, but since Henry's crook, he can't manage it so much now. So I just used to do the flowers and he did the veg and the lawn, but we don't do it anymore.
No. Perhaps there's some help we could find for the garden, maybe a volunteer, or perhaps there's practical ways of making the garden easier for you to manage, Henry.
Yeah, I mean, like the raised bed things, you know, like that Titchmarsh fellow that's on telly.
Yeah, well, that's worth thinking about.
Do you think I should tell her about me leg and me toe?
Well, suit yourself, but I thought my bandage did the trick.
What's all that about then, Henry?
Well, he's got a sore toe and he's got a spot on his leg, but I'll put a bandage round it.
On the leg?
Yes, on the leg.
Any of the ward staff know about it?
Well, we don't like to bother them. I mean, we can manage. It's only a bit of pus.
Well, I'm no expert, Mrs Mellows, but I think we ought to have a medical person look at it.
What's she saying now?
Oh, she said she wants to get somebody to take a look at your leg, but I think it's a bit interfering.
Well, my toe's gone black now, you know.
No, it hasn't.
Well, 'tis my toe, and I tell you, it's black.
Well, it won't hurt to get both of them looked at. The sooner the treatment starts, the better.
Well, tell you what, me backside's sore and all.
I'm not surprised the way you're always lying about and sitting down.
Well, Henry, I think we better get that checked out as well.
Is there anything else you want to stick your nose in?
I'm sorry, Mrs Mellows, if it feels that way. But as I said, this is about keeping both you and Henry as safe as possible.
Not more of that health and safety malarkey.
Well, we need to have a think about it. I mean, how would Henry cope if anything happened to yourself? Or if Henry was on the floor, what would you do?
Well, I'd manage. I always have and I always will.
But perhaps there are ways to help. Of course, these things come down to your choice, if you're able to make decisions for yourself.
Well, of course we can make decisions. Who says we can't make decisions?
No one's saying you can't make decisions. What we need to ensure is that you and Henry are as independent as possible and as safe as possible, and that you're able to make choices and decisions. You must know somebody in your lifetime who couldn't always make a choice or a decision without support.
Well, there was Danny, our herdsman. The lad had Down syndrome, but he was very good on the farm. He couldn't go down to town on his own. Now, when his dad died, they found an old people's bungalow. He wasn't old, of course, but he managed. He went down to the village shop and he had the staff in and the like every day. And he did very well. We were rather pleased. And he's got a girlfriend and all.
That's exactly what I mean. These days we talk about people having the mental capacity to make decisions. All health and social care staff have to work to the Mental Capacity Act. That's to ensure that information is given in a way that can be clear for people to make a decision. Sometimes we use plain English by writing things down or by using pictures or photographs. That way people can make a decision for themselves.
So they can't just put Henry in a home because he's crook. Now, that's what my two sons wanted to do.
No, not at all.
Well, that's what they did with my cousin Flo. Her daughters, they wanted to put her in a home. They were after her money.
Well, sometimes what happens is that family and professionals have to make a decision for somebody. This is called a best interest decision, if they can't make a choice for themselves. Perhaps that's what happened for your cousin.
Well, she was a bit confused. Out she'd go in a shift in the small hours, and she didn't know whether it was day or night.
Do you think Henry's getting a little more confused since his stroke?
Well, he's not the man he was. I never thought it'd come to this.
And how are you, Mrs Mellows? Really?
Well, I cope. I've got to cope. What would happen if I didn't cope?
Darling, I am growing older. Silver threads among the gold.